Jordan Grand Prix were a popular Formula 1 team who became one of the most enduring symbols of Formula 1 in the 1990s and early 2000s. After the team ran out of money, they were bought by the Midland Group in 2005, fronted by Alex Schneider. Midway through the team's debut season in 2006, Schneider grew disillusioned with the team's poor results and sold them to a Dutch sports car company. This is the story of Spyker F1. Alex Schneider was an ambitious businessman who had high hopes when he bought Jordan Grand Prix in January 2005. They spent the first year still under the Jordan moniker learning the ropes of Formula 1. However, there was little improvement in form when the team became Midland F1 in 2006. Halfway through the year he put the team up for sale, and it was purchased by Dutch sports car manufacturer Spyker for $106.6 million, who took over control of the team with immediate effect. There were still 4 races remaining in the championship, so no major changes of management were made, besides Michel Moll being appointed Director of Racing on behalf of Spyker, running the team alongside team principal Colin Colles and technical director James Key. Drivers Christian Albers and Thiago Monteiro kept their race seats, and Marcus Finkelhock, Adrian Sutil and Giorgio Mondini remained as test drivers. The only obvious change to the team was the new orange and silver livery the team ran for the final 3 races of the season. When the season was over, the transition was finalised and Spyker F1 was born. Albers was re-signed for 2007, but Monteiro lost his seat, which was taken by test driver Sutil. The team did no testing over the winter break and unveiled their first car, the F8-7, at Silverstone on February 5th. The car was fairly basic due to the time constraints in developing it. It was largely based on Midland's 2006 car, the M16, but had the unreliable Toyota engine replaced with a 2006 spec Ferrari V8. They had planned from the outset to launch a B-spec model later in the season. The car was also launched with the dazzling bright orange near-fluorescent livery. At the launch, the team also announced the appointment of 4 test drivers. Marcus Finkelhock retained his seat and was joined by Formula Renault 3.5 Series driver Guido van der Garde, whose appointment caused confusion as only 2 months prior he had signed a contract to be test driver for Super Aguri, A1 Grand Prix driver Fayrouz Sforzi, and GP2 Series driver Adrian Valles. Albers and Sutil then did a 2-day shakedown of the car. 2 weeks later, the team travelled to Catalunya to test alongside the other teams, but were only able to bring 1 chassis, which was shared by Albers and Sutil, and proved to be the slowest car there. A week later, they travelled to the Ricardo Tomo circuit for another test and brought along Van der Garde, Valles and Forzi, with the latter running in order to get his FIA Super licence. The brakes caught fire while Sutil was running at one point, but otherwise smooth running was achieved. A week later, they went back to Barcelona, but the final test was plagued with various mechanical issues. 2 weeks later, the team travelled to Australia for the opening round of the season. The team abandoned their original livery and went for something less garish, which more closely resembled the livery used at the end of 2006. Rain and cold temperatures on Friday hampered running, where the drivers found themselves at the bottom of the timesheets. Albers lost first gear early in FP3, which meant he got virtually no running on the soft tyre before qualifying. In qualifying, both drivers unsurprisingly ended up on the back row. Sutil qualified 21st, but was less than a tenth of a second behind the Toro Rosso of Tonio Liuzzi. Albers was running blind on the soft tyre and was 2.6 seconds slower in 22nd. Their main rivals from 2006, Super Aguri, stunned everyone by qualifying 10th and 11th. A grid penalty for Felipe Massa moved both drivers up 1 place. For the race, Albers opted to use the spare chassis and started from the pit lane. The Super Aguri of Anthony Davidson stalled when the lights went out and was passed by Sutil. Sutil almost passed the Red Bull of David Coulthard at turn 1, but was then passed by Massa at turn 5. A recovering Davidson tried to pass Sutil around the outside of turn 9, but they locked wheels, which sent Davidson airborne and put Sutil into a spin, allowing Albers to pass both of them. Sutil repassed a damaged Davidson on lap 6. Albers was losing about a second a lap to Liuzzi in front. On lap 11, he missed his braking point at turn 6 and slid across the gravel trap and into the tyre barriers and out of the race. Sutil pulled away from Davidson and was first lapped on lap 22 by fellow rookie and close friend Lewis Hamilton. He then made his first pit stop and rejoined behind Davidson. On his outlap, he was awarded a drive-through penalty for blocking Hamilton. He took this and was then awarded another drive-through penalty for crossing the white line on the pit lane exit, which left him completely out of contention. Scott Speed retired on lap 29, which moved Sutil up to 20th. He was lapped for a second time on lap 32. Robert Kubica retired on lap 37, which moved him up to 19th. He made his second and final stop on lap 41. David Coulthard and Alex Wurz collided and took each other out of the race on lap 49, which gave Sutil 2 more places, and he finished his first Formula 1 race in 17th. Next up was the Malaysian Grand Prix. A test was held at the circuit the week before the race, but Spyker did not attend as they had several new upgrades to try, including new barge boards, sidepod inlets, revised bodywork, and a new diffuser which couldn't be shipped out to Malaysia and were tested at Silverstone instead. The team also launched a protest against Toro Rosso, who they believed was simply running a modified version of the previous year's Red Bull car rather than their own chassis, which violated the Concord Agreement. However, the case was thrown out. The upgrades didn't appear to fully pay off as they were on the back row in qualifying once again, with Albers qualifying 21st, almost a second behind Alexander Wurz in 20th, and Sutil 2/10 slower in 22nd. A grid penalty for Rubens Barrichello moved both drivers up a place. Sutil passed Albers around the outside of turn 1. When braking for turn 4, the rear of the car snapped and he lightly clipped Jenson Button and slid off into the barriers and out of the race. Takuma Sato hit Tonio Liuzzi, who ran wide there, which also sent Wurz wide, and both were passed by Albers. Albers then ran wide at turn 14 and was passed by Wurz, Sato and Barrichello. Liuzzi pitted for repairs at the end of lap 2, leaving Albers 20th. Albers stayed in touch with Sato in front, but on lap 7 the car got stuck in first gear. He pulled into the pits to try and fix it, but crawling around to the pits in high revs and sitting stationary in the searing heat in the pit box caused the exhaust to overheat and catch fire, ending Spyker's weekend early. Next up was the Bahrain Grand Prix. Qualifying went better as Sutil managed to outqualify David Coulthard, who was having gearbox issues, but he was still a second off the next car. Albers was a quarter of a second slower in 22nd. Coulthard passed Sutil off the line. Sutil then ran into the back of Scott Speed at turn 4, which tore off Sutil's front wing and sent Speed into a spin from which he stalled. Jenson Button span and stalled at the same time, so the safety car was brought out. Sutil pitted for repairs but was stuck in the garage for 5 minutes. Tonio Liuzzi pitted on lap 2, which moved Albers up to 18th. The race resumed at the end of lap 3. Sutil then got back out but was 2 laps down. Liuzzi passed Albers on lap 6. He then took a drive-through penalty on lap 9 for overtaking Ralf Schumacher behind the safety car, which gave Albers the place back. Schumacher pitted on lap 17 and rejoined behind Albers. Albers then pitted on lap 20 and rejoined behind Liuzzi in 19th and lapped. Sutil then pitted on his lap 19 and was lapped for a third time. Liuzzi pitted at the same time and rejoined behind Albers. He then retired on lap 27, which gave a place to Sutil. Takuma Sato retired on lap 35 and David Coulthard on lap 37, which gave both drivers 2 places. Sutil made his final stop on lap 37 and Albers made his final stop on lap 41. Mark Webber retired on lap 42 and Anthony Davidson on lap 52, which gave both drivers 2 more places. They were then lapped for a second and fourth time while running in formation and achieved their first double finish, with Albers in 14th and Sutil 15th. The first European race was the Spanish Grand Prix. Scott Speed did not set a time in qualifying, so Sutil qualified 20th, half a second behind Mark Webber in 19th, and Albers 2/10 slower in 21st after getting traffic on both laps. Jarno Trulli stalled when the cars lined up, which triggered a second formation lap and gave both drivers a place as he started from the pit lane. Both drivers passed a poor starting Anthony Davidson off the line but were in turn passed by Speed. Davidson repassed Albers at turn 5. Ralf Schumacher and Alex Wurz collided at turn 10, which took Wurz out of the race. Trulli passed Albers at turn 13 and Schumacher pitted for repairs, leaving Sutil 17th and Albers 20th at the end of lap 1. Davidson passed Sutil at turn 1 on lap 2 and Trulli passed him there on lap 4. Webber retired on lap 7, Trulli on lap 8 and Speed and Kimi Raikkonen on lap 9, which gave both drivers 4 places. They were losing a second a lap to the field. Tonio Liuzzi then retired on lap 20, which gave them another place. Jenson Button pitted on lap 21 and hit teammate Rubens Barrichello on the pit exit, which broke off his front wing. He was passed by Sutil and Albers and pitted again. Sutil pitted on lap 23 and Albers on lap 24, and both were passed by Schumacher and lapped. Nick Heidfeld pitted on lap 25 and exited his pit box with the front right wheel gun still attached and rejoined behind both drivers. Heidfeld passed Albers on lap 29 and Sutil on lap 31. On lap 33, Albers was awarded a drive-through penalty for ignoring blue flags. He took it and rejoined behind Button. Schumacher retired on lap 44, which gave both drivers a place. Sutil did his second stop on lap 46 and stalled when exiting his pit box, which meant he rejoined behind Button. Albers pitted on lap 47 and stalled as well and rejoined lap for a second time. Nick Heidfeld then retired, which gave both drivers a place. Sutil was lapped for a second time on lap 56, and they finished the race in 13th and 14th, which meant they overtook Toro Rosso in the Constructors' Championship. Next up was the glamour of the Monaco Grand Prix. Albers suffered an engine failure in FP1, and Sutil had engine troubles as well, which meant he only got one run in. Sutil then crashed in FP2. Heavy rain came in FP3, which meant Sutil topped the timesheets. The track dried in time for qualifying, but Albers suffered a hydraulic failure which meant he couldn't set a time. Sutil had his best qualifying so far and beat Ralf Schumacher and Takuma Sato to qualify 19th. Sutil passed Jarno Trulli off the line and Albers passed Schumacher off the line. Both drivers cut the corner at Sat Devote and were passed by Trulli and Sato, but Sutil passed Davidson there. Davidson re-passed him at the Nouvelle chicane. Tonio Liuzzi crashed out at Massenet on lap 2, which gave both drivers a place. Sutil pressured Davidson and pulled away from Albers, who kept Schumacher behind. Albers was first lapped on lap 14 and Sutil on lap 18. Mark Webber then retired on lap 18, which gave both drivers a place. Sato pitted on lap 24, which gave a place to Sutil. Albers pitted only 20 seconds later and rejoined in 20th and last. Sutil continued to pressure Davidson, who took a drive-through penalty on lap 36. Davidson then pitted the following lap as well and rejoined just in front of Albers. Albers was lapped for a second time on lap 38. Sutil pitted on lap 44 and rejoined ahead of Davidson and was lapped for a second time. Albers pitted again on lap 51. Sutil started experiencing brake fade and on lap 54 ran wide and hit the barriers at Massenet, taking him out of the race. Albers was lapped for a third time on lap 63 and then pulled into the pits to retire on lap 70 with a driveshaft failure, but was still classified in 19th. Scott Speed finished 9th, which pushed Spyker back to 11th in the Constructors' Championship. Formula 1 then travelled across the Atlantic for the Canadian Grand Prix. Both drivers qualified on the back row once again, with Sutil half a second off Alexander Wurz in 20th and Albers 6/10 slower in 22nd. A grid penalty for Heikki Kovalainen moved both drivers up a place. For the race, Albers opted to start from the pit lane. Jenson Button stalled when the lights went out after the gearbox gave up and was out of the race before it even started. Sutil passed Anthony Davidson and Ralf Schumacher at turn 1, but Davidson repassed him at turn 3. Kovalainen and Schumacher both passed him at the Le Pont Le hairpin. Albers lightly hit the wall at turn 7 on lap 6, which upset the balance of the car. Scott Speed collided with Alexander Wurz on lap 9 and retired, which gave both drivers a place. Both drivers were first lapped on lap 19. Sutil kept in touch with Schumacher and Davidson, but on lap 22 ran wide at turn 4 and hit the barriers which broke the car's suspension. The safety car was then brought out. Albers pitted on lap 25 along with numerous other drivers. The race resumed at the end of lap 26. Robbie Kubica in 15th suffered a colossal crash on the run to the Le Pont Le hairpin which left debris all over the track. Albers passed Liuzzi while he took evasive action and the safety car was brought out again. David Coulthard and Heikki Kovalainen pitted, which moved Albers up to 15th. Jarno Trulli then pitted on lap 29 and Alex Wurz and Rubens Barrichello on lap 30, which moved him up to 12th. The race resumed at the end of lap 33. Fernando Alonso and Nico Rosberg served stop-go penalties on lap 36, which moved Albers up to 10th. Kovalainen passed him on lap 37. Davidson then pitted after striking a groundhog on the back straight, which meant he kept 10th. Schumacher pitted on lap 40, which moved him up to 9th. Alonso then passed him on lap 41 and Barrichello on lap 42. Kovalainen pitted on lap 44, which moved him back up to 10th. Schumacher passed Albers at turn 1 on lap 45. On lap 48, Albers clipped the curb at turn 8, which sent the car across the grass and tore the front wing off. He crawled round to the pits for repairs, but the damage was found to be terminal. Formula 1 then travelled south for the United States Grand Prix. They qualified on the back row once again, with Sutil 4/10 of a second off Scott Speed in 20th, and Albers 4/10 slower in 22nd. David Coulthard, Rubens Barrichello and Ralf Schumacher all collided at turn 1 and took each other out of the race. Sutil passed Speed, Takuma Sato, Anthony Davidson and Jenson Button there, and Albers passed Button at turn 2, but Button repassed him at turn 5. Davidson ran wide at turn 8 and was passed by Albers there, leaving Sutil 14th and Albers 18th at the end of lap 1. Speed attempted to pass Sutil at turn 1 on lap 2 but was forced to pull out because of the yellow flags. Giancarlo Fisichella ran onto the gravel at turn 4 and was passed by both drivers. Davidson passed Albers at turn 1 on lap 5 and Fisichella passed him at turn 8. Sutil kept in touch with Alex Wurz and Antonio Liuzzi squabbling in front while holding off Sato behind. Sato passed him at turn 1 on lap 14 but then spun off and out of the race at turn 4. Fisichella passed Satil at turn 1 on lap 15. Albers had drifted back from the pack and was first lapped on lap 18. Satil pitted on lap 28 and rejoined behind Albers. He then passed him on lap 31. Speed pitted on lap 36 and rejoined behind Satil, and Liuzzi pitted on lap 37 and rejoined behind Albers. Albers then pitted on lap 38 and was lapped for a second time on lap 40. Davison pitted on lap 41 and Wirtz and Button on lap 43 and all rejoined behind Satil. Satil then pitted on lap 50 and rejoined in 17th, just behind the Toro Rossos. Nick Heidfeld retired on lap 57, which gave both drivers a place. Satil was lapped for a second time on lap 66 and Albers for a third time on lap 68. Liuzzi and Nico Rosberg both retired on lap 68, which gave both drivers 2 places, and they finished the race a lap apart in 14th and 15th. Formula 1 then returned to Europe for the French Grand Prix. Spyker launched a complaint against Super Aguri, who they believed had added Honda upgrades to their cars at Indianapolis, but as with the previous protest, it was dismissed by the FIA. Satil struggled to find a setup on Friday, and Albers crashed in FP2. They qualified on the back row once again, but Albers was 1.5 seconds off Anthony Davidson in 20th, and Satil was a tenth slower in 22nd after suffering a clutch failure on his second run. A grid penalty for Takuma Sato moved both drivers up a place. Satil had an electrical problem on the grid and so switched to the T car and started from the pit lane. Anthony Davidson and Antonio Liuzzi collided at turn 1 and took each other out of the race. Albers dodged this and was passed by Sato on the run to Adelaide. Jarno Trulli and Heikki Kovalainen collided at Adelaide, which took Trulli out of the race and put Kovalainen into a spin where he was passed by both drivers and then pitted for repairs, leaving them 17th and 18th at the end of lap 1. Both drivers fell away from Sato, who pitted on lap 18 and rejoined behind them. Satil then passed Albers on lap 19. After this, Satil's radio broke and he pitted a lap early on lap 28, the same lap as Albers 6 seconds behind. There was minimal time loss during the impromptu double stack, but Albers pulled away too early and took the fuel hose with him and pulled over at the pit exit. Satil resumed and lapped in 17th behind Sato. He was then awarded a drive-through penalty for speeding in the pit lane, which he took on lap 34 and rejoined behind a recovering Kovalainen. Satil pitted again on lap 46. He was lapped for a second time on lap 48. Scott Speed retired on lap 56, which gave him a place, and he finished a disappointing race for the team in 17th. It was now time for the team's unofficial home race, the British Grand Prix. Satil crashed in FP2. Qualifying was successful, as Satil outqualified Takuma Sato by 0.02 of a second to go 20th, while Albers was half a second slower in 22nd. On race day, Sato opted to start from the pit lane. Felipe Massa stalled on the grid, which triggered a second formation lap and started from the pit lane as well. Massa passed Albers at Vale and Satil at Abbey. Mark Webber retired on lap 9, which gave both drivers a place. Nico Rosberg pitted on lap 15 and rejoined behind both drivers. Satil then pulled over on the hangar straight on lap 17 in a cloud of smoke after suffering his first engine failure of the season. Ralf Schumacher retired on lap 23, which gave Albers a place. Albers then pitted and rejoined lapped in 19th and last. Sato pitted on lap 28 and rejoined behind Albers. Scott Speed crashed out on lap 30 and Anthony Davidson pitted to retire, which gave him 2 more places. Jarno Trulli then pitted on lap 34 and rejoined behind him as well. Albers pitted again on lap 39 and rejoined in 17th and last and was lapped for a second time. Trulli retired on lap 44, which gave him a place. Sato pitted on lap 45 but overcut Albers. Antonio Liuzzi retired on lap 54, which gave Albers another place, and he finished the race in 15th. A driver change came at the European Grand Prix. Albers was released from his contract due to a failure to pay sponsorship money. Former Red Bull driver Christian Klien did a test in the car, but the decision was made to give the seat to test driver Markus Winkelhock, despite the fact that he had only done a single day's testing the entire year. Winkelhock lost time in FP2 after spinning off into the gravel. Qualifying ended up being a disappointment for both drivers' home race. Satil qualified 21st once again, but was 1.4 seconds off David Coulthard in 20th. Winkelhock was another 1.4 seconds slower in 22nd. Race day was dry, but dark clouds formed over the circuit, and raindrops began falling just before the start of the formation lap. Winkelhock made a last-minute decision to pit for wet tyres at the end of the formation lap and therefore started from the pit lane. The BMW Saubers collided at turn 2 and both passed by Satil. Winkelhock passed Heidfeld at turn 4. David Coulthard then ran onto the gravel at turn 5 and was passed by both drivers. Kubica repassed Sutil at turn 7. Nico Rosberg and Rubens Barrichello collided at turn 8 and Barrichello was sent onto the gravel and passed by Sutil. At this point, the rain rapidly intensified and Rosberg and Sutil both span at turn 10 and were passed by Barrichello and Winkelhock. Winkelhock's decision to start the race on wet tyres was an inspired one, as every driver except Takuma Sato, Alexander Wurz, Jarno Trulli, Giancarlo Fisichella and Robert Kubica pitted for wet tyres at the end of lap 1. Race leader Kimi Raikkonen attempted to pit but slid out of the pit lane entrance and was forced to do another lap on dry tyres. Winkelhock passed Kubica at the final corner and crossed the start-finish line onto lap 2 in 10th place, but by the time he'd passed the pit lane exit a few seconds later he was up to 6th. The rain was now pouring down. Sutil rejoined in 21st. Winkelhock passed Fisichella at turn 1, Trulli at turn 3, Wurz at turn 4, Sato at turn 5, and then Raikkonen at turn 7 to take the lead of the race on his Grand Prix debut. Winkelhock started lap 3 with a 33-second advantage over second place Felipe Massa. Sutil passed numerous drivers on lap 2 to start lap 3 in 13th. A river formed across the track at turn 1, which Jenson Button caught and slid off into the gravel trap. A few seconds later, Lewis Hamilton did the same, and then he was followed a few seconds later by Sutil, who beached the car. He was followed shortly by Nico Rosberg, Scott Speed and Anthony Davidson. The safety car was then brought out, which narrowly avoided being collected by Tonio Liuzzi as he slid off at turn 1 as well. Winkelhock pitted at the end of lap 3 for a set of extreme wet tyres. The race was then red flagged as the rain refused to subside. The storm then passed and the sun came out. The race resumed 20 minutes later and Winkelhock found himself starting his debut race from both the pit lane and pole position. This time, however, he made the fatal mistake of staying on extreme wet tyres in the hope the rain would return while everyone else switched onto standard wets. The safety car came in at the end of lap 7. Winkelhock had no answer for the cars behind and was passed by Massa at turn 1, Alonso at turn 2, Coulthard at turn 3, Webber at turn 4, Kovalainen at turn 5, Raikkonen at turn 6 and Wurz at turn 12 to be 8th at the end of the lap. Barrichello and Fisichella passed him at turn 1 on lap 9, Schumacher and Kubica at turn 7, Heidfeld at turn 8 and Sato at turn 10, pushing him down to 14th. Trulli passed him at turn 7 on lap 10 and Davison at turn 10, leaving him 16th. The only driver behind him still in the race was Lewis Hamilton, who was a lap down after being retrieved from the gravel trap, unlapping himself during the safety car and then making the equally fatal mistake of switching on to dry tyres. Winkelhock pitted for dry tyres on lap 11. Trulli pitted on lap 12 and rejoined behind him. On lap 14, Winkelhock pulled over at turn 10 after the hydraulics gave up, ending by far the strangest and most surreal weekend in the team's short history early. Despite his legendary and heroic performance at the Nürburgring, Winkelhock was not retained by the team going forward, and for the Hungarian Grand Prix, his seat was taken by former Super Aguri driver Sakon Yamamoto. The team qualified on the back row yet again, with Sutil 7/10 slower than returning Toro Rosso rookie Sebastian Vettel, and Yamamoto a second slower after getting blocked by Giancarlo Fisichella on his second run. Both drivers maintained position off the line. Rubens Barrichello ran wide at turn 2 and was passed by both drivers. He then repassed Yamamoto at turn 8. On lap 5, Yamamoto caught the white line at turn 11 and spun off into the barriers and out of the race. Sutil held off Barrichello until lap 17 when Barrichello pitted. Tonio Liuzzi pitted on lap 20 and rejoined behind Sutil. Sutil pitted on lap 27 and rejoined laps behind Barrichello. Barrichello then pitted on lap 35 and rejoined behind him. Jenson Button then retired on lap 36, which gave him a place. Anthony Davidson and Tonio Liuzzi then retired on laps 41 and 42, which gave him 2 more places. Sutil pitted on lap 45 and crucially rejoined in front of Barrichello. He was then lapped for a second time on lap 46. He finished comfortably ahead of him in 17th, in the first race that year where the team beat a rival driver. The team had planned to launch a new B-Spec model of their car at the Turkish Grand Prix, but it failed the mandatory crash test and therefore was postponed. The 2 drivers qualified on the back row again, with Sutil only 0.4 of a second off Sebastian Vettel in 20th, and Yamamoto 1.6 seconds slower after spinning and then having gearbox problems. Jenson Button and Rubens Barrichello received grid penalties which moved both drivers up 2 places. Button passed Yamamoto off the line. Jarno Trulli was sent into a spin by Giancarlo Fisichella at turn 1. Button, Satil and Takuma Sato were all forced wide, which allowed Satil and Yamamoto to pass Sato and Yamamoto to repass Button. Barrichello passed Yamamoto on the exit of the corner. Yamamoto then ran wide at turn 4 on lap 2 and was passed by Button. Button then passed Satil at turn 9 and Trulli passed Yamamoto there. Sato passed Yamamoto at turn 1 on lap 3, putting him in last. Mark Webber retired on lap 9, which gave both drivers a place. Trulli pitted on lap 20 and rejoined behind Yamamoto. Satil pitted the following lap but stalled the car and got stuck in gear and was pushed into the garage to fix it, as Yamamoto had to pit the following lap. Yamamoto stalled as well, but got going after about 10 seconds and rejoined lapped in 20th. Satil got going 4 minutes later but was now 4 laps down. Satil pitted again on lap 33 and Yamamoto on lap 36. Yamamoto was lapped for a second time on lap 37. Satil was lapped for a 5th time on lap 47. He then pulled over on the final lap with the loss of fuel pressure and Yamamoto came home in 20th. The team finally launched a new B-Spec version of their car at the Italian Grand Prix. Satil got very little running in FP2 due to a gearbox problem. Qualifying was a disappointment as they ended up on the back row once again, with Satil 0.6 of a second off David Coulthard in 20th. Yamamoto was half a second slower in 22nd after crashing on his first run and then getting traffic at the Parabolica on his second. Both drivers maintained position off the line. Sebastian Vettel hit Anthony Davidson at Variante del Rettifilo and was passed by both drivers there and pitted at the end of lap 1. David Coulthard crashed out at Curva Grande on lap 2. Takuma Sato went wide at Variante della Roccia and was passed by both drivers and then the safety car was brought out. The race resumed at the end of lap 6. Yamamoto passed Satil just as they crossed the start-finish line onto lap 9, but Satil took the place back at Variante del Rettifilo. Felipe Massa retired on lap 10, which gave both drivers a place. Sato passed Yamamoto at the first Lesmo on lap 12. Yamamoto pitted on lap 20 and rejoined in 20th. Satil pitted the following lap and rejoined 3 seconds in front of him in 19th. Both drivers were first laps on lap 22. Vettel and Sato did not pit until laps 31 and 34 and rejoined comfortably in front of both drivers. Yamamoto pitted again on lap 35 and Satil on lap 37, and they finished in formation in 19th and 20th. A few days before the Belgian Grand Prix, McLaren were excluded from the Constructors' Championship in light of the revelations of the Spygate scandal, which promoted Spyker from 11th to 10th. Satil crashed on his in-lap at the very end of FP2. Nevertheless, the improvements of the B-Spec car were clear to see as Satil outqualified Anthony Davidson and came within a tenth of Takuma Sato in 19th. Yamamoto was a second and a half slower in 22nd as he did his first run on hard tyres and was then called up to the weighbridge and ran out of time to do a proper run on the soft tyres. A grid penalty for Giancarlo Fisichella moved both drivers up a place. On race day, Davidson and Sato started from the pit lane. Satil passed Sato, Sebastian Vettel and Rubens Barrichello through Eau Rouge and Radion and then Alex Wurz at Les Combes. Yamamoto passed Sato and Vettel at Les Combes as well, but Vettel repassed him at turn 9. Sato then repassed him at Pouhon, leaving Satil 15th and Yamamoto 20th at the end of lap 1. Satil passed Tonio Liuzzi at Les Combes on lap 2. Wurz span at the bus stop chicane and was passed by Yamamoto. Satil passed Jenson Button at Les Combes on lap 3 and Jarno Trulli there on lap 5 to put himself 12th. Vettel pitted on lap 7 and then retired, which moved Yamamoto up to 18th. Trulli pitted on lap 14, which gave Yamamoto a place. Satil pitted on lap 16 and rejoined in 18th just behind Trulli. He tried to pass at Les Combes but went across the grass. Yamamoto pitted on lap 17 and rejoined in 20th and last. He was then lapped on lap 21. Sato and Wurz pitted on lap 21, which moved Satil up 2 places. Wurz ran wide at Les Combes on lap 23 and was passed by Yamamoto. Button and Liuzzi pitted on lap 24, which gave Satil 2 more places. Davidson pitted on lap 25, which gave a place to Yamamoto and Barrichello on lap 26, which gave another place to Satil. David Coulthard retired on lap 30, which put Satil in 12th and Yamamoto in 17th. Satil was lapped on lap 30 and then pitted and rejoined in 16th just behind Barrichello. Yamamoto pitted on lap 31 and rejoined in 19th and last. Wurz pitted on lap 32, which gave him a place and then retired. Sato pitted on lap 33 and rejoined just behind Satil. Button retired on lap 37, which moved Yamamoto up to 17th. Satil held off Sato to come home in 14th, with Yamamoto sandwiching the Super Aguris in 17th in the first race of the year that could genuinely be considered a success. It was now time for Yamamoto's home race, the Japanese Grand Prix. which was being held at Fuji Speedway for the first time since 1977. Yamamoto lost time in FP1 due to an engine failure. FP3 was cancelled only a few minutes in due to torrential rain, and the track was still wet for qualifying. Satil qualified 20th again, which created an all-Japanese back row of Takuma Sato a 10th slower in 21st and Yamamoto a whole second slower in 22nd. The rain returned with a vengeance on Sunday, so the race was started behind the safety car with all drivers except the Ferraris on extreme wet tyres. Tonio Liuzzi started from the pit lane, which moved both drivers up a place. Alex Wirtz span on lap 1 and rejoined behind Yamamoto. The Ferraris of Felipe Massa and Kimi Raikkonen pitted on laps 2 and 3 for extreme wet tyres, which gave both drivers 2 places. Yamamoto pitted for a new set of extreme wets on lap 13 and rejoined in front of Liuzzi in 21st, who was a lap down. Raikkonen pitted again on lap 14, Massa on lap 15 and Alex Wirtz on lap 16, which moved Yamamoto up to 18th. Barrichello, Sato and Trulli pitted on lap 18, which moved Satil to 14th and Yamamoto to 15th. The safety car finally came in at the end of lap 19 after 40 minutes. Raikkonen passed Yamamoto at turn 1. Nico Rosberg, Anthony Davidson and Ralf Schumacher came together, and all three were passed by Satil, and Rosberg was also passed by Yamamoto. Satil passed Heidfeld on lap 21 and Liuzzi passed Yamamoto. Jenson Button pitted for a new front wing on lap 23 and was passed by both drivers. On lap 24, Heidfeld repassed Satil and Rosberg repassed Yamamoto. Raikkonen then passed Satil on lap 27. Schumacher pitted on lap 28, which gave both drivers a place. Massa passed Yamamoto on lap 32. Satil was passed by Liuzzi and Rosberg on lap 35. Heidfeld and Kubica pitted on laps 35 and 36, which gave Satil the places back. Barrichello had been behind Yamamoto since the restart and passed him on lap 37. Davidson then pitted and was passed by Yamamoto. Yamamoto repassed Barrichello on lap 38. Massa passed Satil on lap 39. Raikkonen pitted on lap 40 and rejoined behind Satil, and Rosberg pitted and Kubica served a drive-through penalty, which gave 2 places to Yamamoto. Yamamoto then span at turn 2 on lap 41 and was passed by Kubica and Schumacher. Fernando Alonso then crashed on lap 42, which brought out the safety car, with Satil in 9th and Yamamoto 15th. Satil pitted on lap 44 and rejoined in 18th, and Liuzzi pitted, which moved Yamamoto up to 13th. Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber collided behind the safety car on lap 46, which gave both drivers 2 places. Schumacher then pitted on lap 48, which moved Yamamoto to 10th and Satil to 15th. The safety car came in at the end of lap 48. Satil passed Trulli at turn 1. Rosberg span at turn 2 and retired and was passed by Satil as well. Satil then passed Button at turn 10. Liuzzi passed Yamamoto at turn 16. Satil then passed Yamamoto at turn 6 on lap 50. Liuzzi span at turn 8 on lap 52 and was passed by Satil. Liuzzi repassed him on lap 56. Yamamoto pitted on lap 57 and rejoined in 14th. Satil then passed Liuzzi again on lap 58. Barrichello and Trulli pitted on lap 60, which gave both drivers 1 place. Liuzzi passed Satil again on lap 64. Yamamoto was then lapped. Heidfeld retired on lap 66, which gave both drivers a place, and they finished a difficult race in 9th and 12th. However, after the race, Liuzzi was given a 25-second time penalty for overtaking Satil under the yellow flags when Davidson retired on lap 64, which promoted Satil to 8th and gave Spyker their first point of the season. By taking the point from Toro Rosso, they also overtook them in the Constructors' Championship. After the race, it was announced that due to financial difficulties, Spyker Cars sold the team to a consortium fronted by Director of Racing Michel Moll and Indian businessman Vijay Mallya for €88 million, who became team leader with immediate effect. Formula 1 remained in the Far East for the Chinese Grand Prix. Typhoon Kroso brought heavy rain to the circuit, which created a wet FP1. They qualified on the back row as usual, with Satil 4 tenths off Takuma Sato in 20th and Yamamoto 7 tenths slower in 22nd. The rain returned for race day, so the whole field started on wet tyres, except for Satil and Yamamoto, who opted for extreme wets. Ralf Schumacher span at turn 2 and was passed by both drivers. Yamamoto passed Satil at turn 10, but Satil took the place back at turn 13. Anthony Davidson and Rubens Barrichello collided and span at turn 1 on lap 2 and were passed by both drivers. The rain started getting heavier on lap 2, but not enough for extreme wet tyres, and both drivers were repassed by Schumacher, Davidson and Barrichello on lap 3. Satil pitted on lap 6 and then Yamamoto on lap 7 for wet tyres. Yamamoto was first lapped on lap 8 and Satil on lap 10. Davidson retired on lap 12, which gave both drivers a place. Both drivers pitted for dry tyres on lap 24, 11 seconds apart, and were lapped for a second time. At this point the rain started coming down again, and Sutil went straight on at the final corner and crashed in the pit lane entrance. Schumacher, a lap ahead, spun off at the same place a moment earlier, which moved Yamamoto up to 19th. Yamamoto pitted again for wet tyres on lap 26. Championship contender Lewis Hamilton beached his car in the gravel trap at the pit lane entrance on lap 31, which moved Yamamoto up to 18th. He then pitted for dry tyres as the rain stopped. Robbie Kubica retired on lap 34, which moved him up another place. Yamamoto was lapped for a third time on lap 35 and finished the race in 17th. The Toro Rossos of Sebastian Vettel and Antonio Liuzzi finished 4th and 6th, which demoted Spyker back to 10th in the Constructors' Championship. The season reached its conclusion at the Brazilian Grand Prix. Rain came in FP1, which limited running. Sutil then had fuel pressure problems in FP3. This continued in qualifying and disrupted his first run, putting him 21st, 6 tenths behind Anthony Davidson in 20th. Yamamoto struggled and was 2 tenths slower in 22nd. On race day, Sutil started from the pit lane. Antonio Liuzzi collided with Giancarlo Fisichella and Heikki Kovalainen with Ralf Schumacher at the Senna S, and Yamamoto passed Kovalainen and Schumacher there. He then passed Liuzzi at Descida del Lago. Sutil passed Kovalainen there and then passed Liuzzi at turn 8. Fisichella went onto the grass at the Senna S on lap 2 and rejoined right in the path of Yamamoto, who speared into the back of him and took both of them out of the race. On lap 8, Lewis Hamilton lost transmission and dropped behind Sutil. Rubens Barrichello served a drive-through penalty on lap 9 and rejoined behind Sutil as well. A recovering Hamilton passed Sutil on lap 12. Mark Webber retired on lap 15 and Jenson Button on lap 21, which gave Sutil 2 places. Sutil pitted on lap 22 and was passed by Barrichello. Sutil was right behind Davidson after their pit stops and locked the brakes and collided with him at the Senna S on lap 24. Sutil tried to carry on but lost brake pressure and pitted on lap 26 and was pushed into the garage. He came back out 3 minutes later, but the problem wasn't fixed and he pitted again and came back out 3 minutes later again, several laps down. He then made 2 more stops on laps 29 and 38 before giving up and retiring the car, ending Spyker's season on an anticlimax. It's difficult to describe Spyker's brief foray into Formula 1 as anything other than a failure. They had built a fairly basic car that didn't bring them any further up the grid, but a huge surge in form from former rival Super Aguri left them largely in a class of their own at the back with no one to fight against, exemplified by the fact that they never qualified any higher than 19th. The car wasn't abnormally unreliable, but one or both drivers crashed at 9 of the 17 races that year, which made clean races rare. The introduction of the B-Spec car did improve their fortunes somewhat as they became capable of fighting with Super Aguri and Honda, but a solitary point scored at Fuji didn't help them get any higher than net 11th in the Constructors' Championship, which on paper was 10th following McLaren's exclusion, earning them much needed prize money. Adrian Sutil had a fairly average debut season in the shadow of the stellar debut seasons of fellow rookies Lewis Hamilton and Heikki Kovalainen. He was consistently the fastest Spyker driver, being outqualified only twice, both times by Albers, and outraced only once, again by Albers. He impressed in the second half of the season with strong performances in Belgium and Japan in the B-Spec car, but crashed in races no fewer than 6 times. He finished 19th in the Drivers' Championship with 1 point. Sakura Yamamoto was brought in for nothing more than his sponsorship money. He was outqualified and outraced by Sutil at every Grand Prix, but was usually closer in the races than in qualifying, where he rarely got clean laps. He finished 24th in the Drivers' Championship with the best finish of 12th at the Japanese Grand Prix. Christian Albers brought a modest amount of experience, having already raced in Formula 1 for the previous 2 seasons, but was only able to outqualify or outrace Sutil when he had mechanical problems, and himself was fairly crash prone as well. He finished 25th in the Drivers' Championship with the best finish of 14th at the Bahrain and Spanish Grand Prix. Marcos Winkelhock is a name much more well known than you would expect of a driver who started only 1 race, but he put himself and the team on the map with a genius strategy call that gave him a brief but commanding lead on his Grand Prix debut. Failing to finish in his sole appearance meant he was unclassified in the Drivers' Championship. After the season was finished, new team owner Vijay Mallya renamed the team Force India, and Spyker F1 was no more. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Brook_F1, and I'll see you all next time.